Hello. Thanks for joining me in this session. This session is going to be a reminder that the fundamentals of experiences are more important than new software features you're being sold or the top 10 tricks to hack employees' brains. This is going to be about creating enriching experiences through the cohesion of an experience's elements or the tension that you might create between them. First, let's imagine this situation. Very hard to believe, I know. Inequity, people divided, a world on fire. Surely what the world needs is another serious game to teach them. We need to get over ourselves first. So this presentation, in order to talk about coherence, and I need to first talk about behavior change and where serious games are going to be fitting in this change that we're talking about. Then I'm going to present to you a persuasive game framework for serious games. Then we're going to break it down bit by bit to show you how those systems can be used to interact with each other. And then finally, I'll show you a quick way to check for cohesion between these elements or why you might not want to. The first, where I'm coming from. A bit about me. I come from the shores of Lake Ontario, near Niagara Falls, and aged nicely on the shores of Tikapa Moana in Tamaki Makaurau, which is Auckland, New Zealand. My mom worked in a library since I was a child. My father was a newspaperman, and while I don't attribute that to my appreciation of physical mediums, it is a through line in this session. And I've made games pretty much my whole life, about 40 of them across different mediums and scales, from serious games like Cohere 1816 to mecha games for Vietnamese conservation programs, to hobby games or digital training games for supply lines, to games that were giveaways at conferences about hacking and cybersecurity, all the way to digital games that are interactive audio stories, serving as creative director, and doing live festivals of play outside and in museums to activate spaces, talking about how artifacts are created, for instance, and the narratives around them. So with all of this, my focus is always on the player experience, and I do not care about the medium very much. So I want to talk about all of these game features first in change, or serious games, which of course have external outcomes that we'd like the game to be for, often a learning outcome. So let's orient ourselves in change. The first thing that we need to understand is that games are... I'm not teaching in this way. We come from a student perspective, perhaps, where we say, oh, teaching, it's just standing in front of the classroom and telling people things. Or a game, oh, it's just getting to the end first. I'll just tell them the answer, right? It's a naive perspective of what is a complex thing. Teaching, yes. Learning, yes. It's not just get the pieces of your pie and now you know the things. We need to be able to understand the vague pieces of complex systems and not try to define them and put them in little boxes, which is what I'm going to do exactly today when I tell you about the different elements of a system. What we do need to understand as well is that it's a conversation then. Learning, serious games are a conversation. So the complexity of the experiences, the learning process we have, similar to the complexity of the experiences we're trying to teach about. Everything in it is entangled, and there's feedbacks, loops everywhere, and the relationships between those feedback loops is constantly changing. And so when we're making a game as well, we need to be able to design those loops in and also recognize that what we're trying to do is not a didactic, I tell you this is the truth. We want people to be able to come to their own realizations. And this kind of leans into the kind of frameworks for behavior change generally. And there are a lot of them. And here's one that I quite like from Dr. Jane Cox in Australia. It leans on the trans-theoretical model of behavior change as the basics. And there may be other behavior change wheels, etc. But this one is a translation device between how of game design and the when or what part of a process of behavior change you might be looking at. And so what kinds of game mechanisms or game dynamics you might want at that particular stage, keeping in mind that it's not a linear stage and you may be anywhere and you may want to do all of these at the same time. All of the behavior model changes that I've seen kind of frame similar things. They note that change is integrating across the layers of information and access to that information and knowledge, which is when you really understand something, to the kinds of actions, behaviors that you personally exhibit in the middle there, and how you integrate with your environment around you, whether it's the other people or your natural environment, your work setting, etc. Interaction between these layers looks like continually checking how you're doing towards progress, evaluating how the process is working for you, having implicit processes as well as explicit processes, and most of all, in order to get lasting change, you need an attitude change that will emerge from constant exposure, positive messaging, et cetera, et cetera. And if you want to keep that change, you need that attitude change. Otherwise, you are going to stop the change when the incentives are gone. So serious games, then, are part of larger campaigns. They're not just standalone things that change your behavior when you're done. They're not interventions in that way. So serious game designers can only control one piece of the entire ecosystem that might exist. Oftentimes, you can't determine the learning support that's available in an organization. For instance, you just have to recognize it and work with it when you're making your serious game. We need to know how our serious game interfaces with these other things. So what I am going to be talking about is how serious game organism can influence others, as in other people in the organization or people that person interacts with, etc., through the direct action of people who've experienced it and have explicit cognitive attitude changes. So they maybe in the short term have an explicit cognitive attitude change, and that may spur some immediate action, even if it doesn't mean long-term attitude change. But by having this effect on the environment around them, with the explicit action quite soon after a game, they might be able to change the culture, and that allows recursive effects to change attitudes more generally in the long term. So a persuasive game framework deals with the internal design of these serious games only. Right, so we're just going to take a look inside the single organism that is a serious game. What I'm not going to be talking about are behavioral psychology tricks. I'm not going to be looking at the choice architecture and effects and all of this stuff. That's at a lower level than what I'll be talking about today, which is just the assume you can do all of those things in the mechanics, or you can do your psych tricks in the narrative, etc. Not talking about that. We're talking about how those elements are going to work together at a higher level. All right. So here's the persuasive game framework, and we'll then break it down. So thinking of it as an organism, or in this case, a single cell, what we have on the outside there first is the person's attitudes. This is the little cilia where it's interacting with the environment, sensing things, interacting with things, moving towards food sources, etc. The attitudes are going to act as a filter for what it wants or what it doesn't want. And then we have these four other things: interaction with the thing, the mechanics. These are within the serious game, I might say. This interaction of the serious game bits, the narrative of the game, the sensory aesthetics, and the expressive medium itself, the how it is mediated, right, in the cell wall here in the organism. How is it floating in water? What is the medium which is doing, etc. In our metaphor. I'm not going to belabor the metaphor. These may look familiar, these elements. These are similar to Jesse Schell's elemental tetrad, and these are the parts of an experience, a game experience. And so we want to talk about what the designer can control, which is the mechanics here to influence the dynamics the player has with them and the player experience of interaction and persuasion, sensation, etc. So let me just reorganize that into more of a diagram. We're going to be looking at these four bits here. We're going to be looking at the mediation, the media of the game. We're going to be looking at the procedural rhetoric, or the mechanics of the game, and how that's persuading, the narrative devices of the game, and the immersion, which I really mean here, and that's a controversial term, is the sensory aesthetics. If you want to talk about more immersion later, we'll talk more about incorporation, for instance. So here's the elemental tetrad that I referenced, that Jesse Schell outlined years and years ago. What we design are these bits. He, of course, called it just aesthetics. Here I'm calling it sensory, but the sensory experiences that set players' expectation, the mechanics, which are the rules, the decisions, the actions, the goals, challenges, and all that nice stuff. The narrative, which are the storylines, characters that ground player actions, as well as immerse them into the story and help them identify with it, etc. And then the medium itself, so the physical or digital materials that actually shape the design. Now, let's break this down by each of these organs of the game and how they kind of interrelate with each other. Granted, I do want to stress that this is a complex interaction and they affect each other. It's not parts of a whole here. This is complex systems. So the first we'll start with, which is the mediation, the medium of the expression, and what you need to consider in order to get your persuasive message across. First is, what kind of affordances does your medium have? How does it provide restrictions and opportunities or intuitions for players to interact? Are there controls? How do you interact with it? Is it going to imply a certain way of interacting? Is it easy for some of the things they've already used to get intuitive? And then the physical design itself, it will allow particular sensory experiences, which is going to interface, of course, with that other element. So here's some examples. In the early 90s, Disney and Pixar, a young company led by Steve Jobs, teamed up to create Toy Story, the first ever feature-length computer animated film. Hopefully you know about this, but here's a little bit of history of it. This groundbreaking project at the time, it was as much a technological challenge as it was a creative one. Pixar had to invent the tools to make the movie happen. And so they built software like RenderMan and Minv to empower the animators to bring this to life. The limitations of the early 3D animation, though, shaped the story in unexpected ways. The technology excelled at rendering geometric shapes and struggled with organic textures, often making them look plastic. So this led the team to focus on toys, smooth, geometric, perfect for the medium, the technology. The director, John Lasseter, noted that a child's room with its flat floors and simple environments was also easier to render. And the result was a story about plastic toys coming to life, a concept that aligned perfectly with the technology's strengths. So while the tech allowed for intricate details like the plaid on a Woody shirt or Buzz's helmet stickers, it had its limits. Initially, the team had avoided human characters, fearing they'd look unconvincing. But as the story evolved, Andy, the boy in the story, he did become essential to it. And his design improved over time, showcasing that Pixar was able to grow its capabilities like Toy Story 3, but you'll notice that wasn't the focus of the story first. It's the toys for a reason. This is a testament to how we can use the medium's strengths to tell our story and choose the right story. Here's another example for controls. So Jay Schneider, who is a legendary game designer and educator, also developed Magic the Gathering for Xbox. And he had an issue with mapping what was a physical card flopping game, Magic the Gathering, with buttons, which is now going to say, how does the medium, the console and the controller, shape our interaction? So what he did is he mapped the controls to match those of Halo, which was another really popular game on the original Xbox. And the team therefore leveraged the existing player habits to onboard them more quickly. So in this case, the Xbox controller became the interface that not only served Magic the Gathering's mechanics, but also linked to a kind of interface narrative for the players themselves. He was able to tell whether they had a PlayStation at home or an Xbox based on how well they were able to pick up this game. Here's a more basic example of physical interactions. With books, many people prefer physical books over e-readers. The common reasons that they do, for those who do, are probably pretty obvious. There's the sensory experience of feeling the pages, the smell of the book, the weight of the book in your hands, which adds to the experience of reading for some people. And they have this image of their mind of reading a cozy book on a rainy day in a corner. And with a paper book, that image might be more complete than if you were with an e-reader. Well, you could also say that it might be easier on the eyes than glowing screens if you're using those. And for some, displaying the books themselves is an important part of the experience. There's an aesthetic appeal to that and an emotional connection to the books that you have and you've read. So writing notes on pages, making a paper note, like folding it, it feels more intuitive than poking around on a screen for a lot of people. And allows them to engage with the book itself in a way that you wouldn't necessarily if it was a book on a screen. So what does this mean for a worked example of making a serious game? So let's work through a serious game, starting with the medium. So we'll go back to inequity, the game. This is going to be where our learning goal here for this. I want to say that players will pay attention to the existence and impacts of income inequality, and players will react emotionally and intellectually to systemic inequity in the game. So we're kind of leveraging Bloom's affective domain here in the first couple of levels. We're just going to keep this a simple game, knowing that what we're doing in a theoretical behavior, a trans-theoretical behavior change model is we're looking at the initial stages where somebody's becoming aware of a problem. So with mediation, here's the 3 points. What kind of affordances and controls and physical design opportunities are there? So we're going to make a physical tabletop game here. This will help shape what our restrictions are going forward. And we'll just say that we will have tokens to move between the players, and that'll represent stuff, right? Wealth, money, I don't know. Doesn't matter. We'll have tokens that move people. So this will afford us, because it's physical in-person tabletop game, ad hoc interactions with each other and emotional reactions that will become a lot more instant than if we were mediated by technology and remote from each other. The controls are going to be literally moving of pieces. We don't need to worry about any kind of arrow buttons or mouse clicks, etc., or using a technology at all. And we're just going to take these tokens and literally move them between each other. And because of this, there's an opportunity here with the physical design. We'll have these physical pieces that visually accumulate or be lost and go to someone else, which is going to have a lot of those emotional impacts that we might not have if it was just numbers on a screen, for instance. So this is what we'll use. Tokens, maybe some paper to denote, like, here's my player area or something like that. I don't know. But we're just going to limit ourselves to some simple physical bits. I haven't done any of the other design. We just know we want to keep it to this. So back to here. We've checked off medium. We're going to now do the mechanics of the game, the interactive bits, and say how can we align that with our persuasion. So when we're looking at the game mechanics, again, I'm keeping this fairly high level. We are looking at, we have the goal and feedback towards the goal that measures our progress. So the game is going to provide response. So sometimes figuring out what changed in the game is part of the game. And this is when you have black box type of games, and the feedback is the game, receiving the feedback. The challenge in the game is often where the learning is happening. So you want to make that the hard part if you're doing something like that. The players understand the mechanics through the experience. And finally, the actions. We want to make sure that we define these things. What are the verbs that players have interacting with the medium, the control verbs, and then the game verbs. What are players doing within the game when they do that thing with the controller? So all of these can be used to reinforce our persuasive message. Here's some examples of non-serious games. So the mechanics example here in Street Fighter 2, a simple game. You go fight punch until you knock the other opponent's health bar down. Do this in time limit twice to win. You have a gameplay journey here, right? That you're learning this. First, you smash the buttons, and eventually the buttons begin to differentiate. Some are punch, some are kick. Some are better at some times than others. Some buttons work well in sequences, and you can do special moves. And some work at some times, like ducking a high kick and then doing a power low kick. You want to time these things. And some will do super moves like Hadouken. Right? You eventually master these skills, and congratulations, you've learned something. Of course, it's all within the game, not a serious game there. Here's a serious game. This is a persuasive game, an adver game called The Parking Game. And in this game, you had to maneuver a car through a city and park it outside a bank in less than a minute. The challenge consisted of exiting a parking lot, moving quickly through the city, and parking in the one free parking slot outside the bank. Their goal for this game was to show that online banking was better because you didn't need to go to the bank. And so they wanted to make it hard. This was done by using arrow keys, and you drive the car around the city, and you didn't want to sustain too much damage, which is a little bar at the top there. Otherwise, your car would blow up and you lose the game as well. So at the end, if you made it, or if you didn't, you'd get a little caption saying, hey, having difficulty making it to the bank. And then you'd be either invited to access information about signing up for internet banking or not. And in the case of winning, you would be said, wait, well done, you made it this time, but is it that easy in real life? And offered up the same options about signing up for internet banking. So as a serious game to kind of change people's behavior, as an adver game, there was a core problem here, which is that the goal and feedback reaching the bank before time ends. If you're good at it, you don't care about it. That doesn't reinforce the idea of doing internet banking. The challenge, though, was this. We can just break down the analysis here. Goals: reach the bank before the game ends. I've bolded some of the verbs. The challenge is race against time. Well, avoiding damage from collisions. That's why it's hard. And then the action is just press the arrow keys. That's my controller interface. which makes me drive in the game, and I will be doing with intention navigating the streets and traffic. So there was no mechanical alignment with the learning goal, though. I'm driving around the streets, but what's that have to do with internet banking being good? It's not. All right, so let's go back to our work example. We want to include some mechanics here. So we'll make a goal about, it's about inequity. So we'll do something that's about possessing more tokens than other teams. We'll say collectively so that it's a game about not a sharing game, but like a shared effort to do well. And we'll make it about teams versus other teams. We'll make the challenge balancing then the distribution of the tokens between the different players that are going to have some sort of inequity between them. The action players will do will move tokens. We'll do things like break down how you move tokens, adding them, removing them, taking them, etc. So let me diagram this, make it a little easier to understand. As you can see, I might have 3 players, and I'll say, I don't know, I'm not going to give them names yet. I'm just going to have green, blue, and orange. And I'll say the one thing you can do in this game is you can move tokens. That's how you interact. And you might be taking it, which is giving it to yourself, or which is taking it for yourself, giving it to another player, adding it to a pool of some kind, or removing it from the pool. And that's it. Those are my only actions. In order to make this game more inequitable, I'm just going to take those actions and I'm going to make them different for each player. So you see green player here has a lot more tokens they can take from the pool for themselves. They can only add a little bit from the supply though to the pool. So they're going to run out of tokens quite quickly to take if the green player is the only one doing that. And then they can give one to orange player. And the reason this is important, blue player is kind of in the middle there, is that orange player cannot take tokens on their own. They can add to the pool, or they can remove all from the pool. So they have actually different actions or different degrees of the same actions. So inequity here procedurally can highlight the idea that inequity in the game, all right? In order for all players to do well, they're going to need to collaborate well together, or orange is going to upturn the cart, so to speak. So going into the narrative, what narrative would fit this? And the narrative is going to ground the player's actions, allow them to relate to it, intuit to it, and that's the thematic guidance it can give. And then the story context can provide motivation to achieve these things. And then finally, and most importantly for persuasion, we want to have a narrative that can transport the players to this world, whether it's a Toy Story world or whether it's a game where you're, or gives you a chance to reflect, or where you can identify with it. So back to quick idea of storytelling. Imagine a non-game interactive, for instance, just a spooky campfire story. So the immersion here is a high art, right? Through oratory techniques, repetition, pacing, listener interjections, that makes it interactive. All goes towards the player or the experience of the listeners. And we want to do that with the narratives here too. So here's a game example with Pandemic, where the players are cooperatively working together to fight a virus. And they all have different roles, of course, mechanically speaking, but really what we're getting at is a narrative of us against the viruses. So back to our worked example. In our narrative, we're going to say we are factory setting. Players are owners, maybe the foremen, laborers. The tokens are going to represent production wealth of something like that. And the players want to produce into the pool, and then they're going to claim that personal wealth to gain his personal wealth. So the pervasive truth here, so something that can help us really identify with it and that we want to continue in the story, is that the owners benefit the most, but the labor holds the power through the ability to strike, etc. So here's the diagram again, but I've just labeled things as part of our narrative to help ground it. So now it might make more sense where I'm production, and that's what puts things into the pool in the factory, and then people can take wealth from it. The owner can take a lot of wealth, if you remember from the actions. And so on. And we can share the wealth as well, pay it maybe through wages or something like that. You'll also notice I'm adding some debrief questions here to help with the reflection. This could happen during the course of the game where it's called out. It could happen after the game. You could even work it in with characters if you're doing a game, a role-playing style game. In this particular context, I think just after you play the game, you debrief, and then maybe you play it again, maybe change the rules. Why not? Next up is sensory design. So here's we're going to be looking at the aesthetic experience. And in this case, the sensory aesthetic experience, this is usually the first thing players encounter when they actually see the game, and it's going to set their expectations and will indicate the usability of the game as well, with good graphic design, basically. And you can use this pretty easily to create intentional incoherence with cartoon characters, etc. So we will try that when cartoon characters deal with harsh issues of social inequity. Let's try it. So here quickly is a little video that shows what a incoherent example looks like.
You're not thinking that. I sure am, boy. Ever heard of Evel Knievel?
And as you can see here, in The Man with the Golden Gun, you have a slide whistle as they jump the bridge, which really undermines the awesomeness of the scene and the stunt that they conducted there. Here's another example where there was coherence, where this is Pax Pamir, a board game by Cohere, where they produced the game, which is set in the Great Game in Afghanistan, where they produced it with a nice, lovely cloth map with these wax seal-like pieces representing all of your armies and or roads, and using illustrations that were kind of period appropriate. It made it a beautiful game that was really quite a socially conscious game. It represented well the local people who were agentic within the game, and the art direction shined through, which is quite abstract, but very evocative at the same time. It made it almost an heirloom quality game. His experience. Here's another example by Cole Worley, where it was Root, a game about conquest, you might say, and extraction of wealth in a forest, in a woodland area. But you notice the characters are quite cartoony. It made it a very accessible game, even though when you play it, it's quite a heady theme. And people did note that even though they love the illustrations, they're like, wow, it's quite a simple game. It's not as approachable as the art might make it seem. So with our worked example, here's something we could do with our images. We want to make it a persuasive game talking about the inequity. We could go with an old-timey factory-oriented theme where our pool might be represented by a factory, the coal might be the pieces, the tokens that we're getting, and then the players might have a little board in front of them or a little piece of paper that has a picture on it that shows like maybe whether they're the owner or whether they're the laborer, etc. Now, this might serve as a way of distancing it from the players through time, because they say, oh, well, this used to be like this, but it's not like that anymore, right? Even if they're not thinking that consciously, it might be unintentionally there. So what we might want to try is a different setting. Let's just teleport it through time and make it a little cartoony. So let's try this. We could do a modern game, just these little cartoon graphics, and we could show how the owner is this big rich guy sitting on money, and we've got another white guy who's the boss foreman, and then we have a lady who's working as the laborer and is clearly exasperated, where everyone else seems to be enjoying their time. So what we can look at here is how the cartoon nature of this allows you to exaggerate things, but also the pieces, instead of just being generic tokens or representing dollars, we can have them represent very real things that you'd have from wealth, like housing security or being able to feed babies and the like. And so it puts real stakes on it, even though things can be exaggerated at the same time. And this experience might lead into how people feel about it more. Immersion, but with a consistency, mind you. It doesn't have to be realistic. It just needs to be consistent internally to create that world so that we can identify with it, because we can identify with housing and babies and icons. All right. So those are our four elements that we can we use all together to persuade somebody when they're playing our game. All right, so now the question is whether we intentionally cohere or not. So here's the model again. What we ask ourselves is, do we want to have the mechanics and the narrative and the sensory all persuade in the same direction? Or do we want to highlight at something by having it so very different from the others? And that becomes our message, in fact, the dissonance there. So cohesion or disunity, here's the point for doing them. First, cohesion, the narrative, the mechanics, and the medium communicate with each other to reinforce the interaction experience that you're trying to persuade people to. You need to get them to care about something, for instance, like the income inequity. However, if you have disunity, like the cartoon graphics, it allows us to exaggerate something. It's not serious looking anymore. Subvert our expectations a little bit. Say, oh yeah, like Root did. We can subvert those expectations and we say, well, even though we're doing something exaggerated, we can still ground it in something real, like the babies and the housing crisis, etc. So if you want to highlight that, it's actually quite ridiculous how much money they're making, then you can use the big dollar guys sitting on dollars. It depends on what your learning intention is. Do you want to have a cohesive message to say we want to work together and we want to solve income inequity, and here's how the players can work together to maximize their scores, etc. Or you could even change the rules of the game and make entirely and make it a straight up competitive game between the three players and just see what happens, so they can see how labor has the strength of strikes to upturn the cart there and prevent the other players from getting any money unless they get served. It depends on what your point is. So here we had, as I said, the cartoon separating it from life. It's all a game, right? A big exaggeration, but we can contrast that with the real stakes supported by the represented by the wealth, and the exaggeration allows us to make fun of it a little bit and show how ridiculous it is, while creating the distance from ourselves. So that's, even though it's a very serious issue, we may want to do a cartoony graphics like this. Here's a quick tool to check for cohesion, and it should make a lot of sense. There's a lot of ways to do this, but here's one I like because it's easy. We just do the vibe check and just get a word cloud. So whenever you're talking about whether the mechanics raw or just look at the pictures without anything else, and have people generate a word cloud of things that this makes them think about. And then you kind of look for how these line up. So here would be 3 different word clouds, for instance, from 3 different elements. And I could look at these and be like, oh yeah, they all have to deal with the same things. I'm kind of looking at wages, workers, power. That is indeed what I'm getting at in this game. Our key takeaways then in this talk are that, one, when you're creating a persuasive game for serious games, you want to make sure that you're cohesive with your elements, unless you want to highlight a particular thing and exaggerate it, in which case you can be a little unreal, but you might want to make it dissonant from the rest so that it stands out. For instance, that becomes part of the game, like a very difficult control scheme. Just to walking in a game makes the game about the difficult control scheme, and it highlights that. Secondly is know which part of the behavior change your game is going to be in. Are you skill training, in which case the persuasion isn't really part of it. You just need them to do their job and upskill skill mastery. Or are you persuading somebody because you want behaviors to change in a larger context? Or is it some other part? In which case, go for gold. All right. Here's a few resources for you. The differences game, which is what I've modeled the worked example off of, is freely available on plato-philosophy.org. And the word cloud generator you can use right there or find your own. And then finally, the resource where the elemental tetrad found its first home is the great and still relevant Art of Game Design Book of Lenses by Jesse Shaw. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, and I hope you do, please feel free to email me at one of these addresses. Thank you very much.